All right. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Charles Alder, and I'll introduce myself a little bit further in a minute. But today, I want to talk about a subject that I'm really passionate about, and I know that Peter and Deb are particularly enormously passionate about this concept of reimagining, rebuilding, reinvigorating rural communities, which are such a fundamental part of our community fabric, no matter what country we live in. We all don't live in metropolitan areas. We are a widely dispersed population in many countries. And Australia is just one of those countries where there's so much between point A and point B. And I know, Deb, in America, you can drive from town to town. It might be 100 kilometres or 100 miles, but in Australia, it can be 400 or 500. And sometimes if you're a farmer at an outback station, you want to go and get a litre of milk. Too bad if you forgot it, because you're not going the 4 hours to get it. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Rebuilding Australia and today's presentation. Our mission is to help rural communities rebuild and reimagine their towns for the future. And it's a fairly all-encompassing statement, but it's built on the basis of experience that my wife and I have had, and I know that Peter and Deb have also experienced this in rural communities, but there's a great opportunity in rural communities to really make a significant contribution to our countries. And although services in many country towns have been reduced over the last 20 or 30 years as technology has boomed, and it's been great to be closer to things, country towns still have a very important piece in the fabric of our communities, particularly for farming and agriculture, because if we don't have farmers who can access services and communities, be they wheat silos or trucking companies or fertilizer distributors, or even workers to work on their farms, if those people have to come from 500, 700, 1,000 kilometres away, it almost makes agriculture an impossibility. So it really is important that we help rebuild these rural communities, not just because of lack of services, but a number of other challenges, which we'll come to in a minute. So who are we and who is Rebuilding Australia? So this is my wife, Tracy, and I, and Rebuilding Australia is a combination of us as two individuals and a group of partners who I'll introduce shortly. Since 2013, Tracy and I have been involved in supporting agriculture around Australia and internationally over the last 2 years, between 20 and 2022. And during the drought period of Australia between 2013 and 2020, we ran and established the leading Australian charity providing drought, fire and flood support for farmers and rural communities. That charity was called Rural Aid. And it was during that time that we really got to get a clear understanding of the challenges that not only did farmers face in these rural communities, but also the fabric of the communities and the communities themselves. When times are tough, people don't spend in those towns, students, families leave, schools get reduced quotas of teachers, doctors leave, dentists don't come, etc., etc. And so we saw a lot of those challenges during that 2013 to 2020 period. And so, in fact, during the end of our time at Rural Aid, we actually engaged Peter and Bank of Ideas to help us establish some community-based programs. And today, what we're launching with Rebuilding Australia is a real extension of that service and a real integration with Corporate Australia, who are significantly interested in supporting small town renewal, country communities, and investing not only their staff, but also their money through ESG and CSR initiatives that many of those companies have. So I mentioned that Rebuilding Australia is really, it's a partnership. One of the successful things we did when we were running the charity is that we understood that we didn't know everything, but there were people around us who could provide us with the resources that together as a team, we were much stronger, much more dynamic, and much more able to deliver resources and solutions to farmers and communities.
Peter Kenyon, I know him from WA.
And so Rebuilding Australia is, again, an initiative that we're bringing together the people who've got the experience and the knowledge to help us deliver solutions to rural communities. So we've got Bank of Ideas, which is Peter Kenyon, and Peter's online at the moment. Rebuilding Australia, Tracy and myself, and then Deb and Becky in the United States, who run the Save Your Town, which is a fantastic initiative in North America. And hello, Deb there. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. And Peter, I think you were there a minute ago, but you've dropped off my screen, but that's all good. There you go. Got you back. Mm-hmm. And the other part of the Rebuilding Australia initiative is that we're engaging corporates who want to be part of the process of doing something and giving back to these rural communities. Having access to corporate partnerships, corporate money, doesn't mean that those corporates are actually going to do it for these towns, because we don't want that. What we want is we want that investment and input to help move these country towns to a position where they can be more sustainable, they can have better investment, but they can also have outside input and support, which we know is vital. And so particularly, just think of in Australia today, we've got the Big Red Bash in a place in Birdsville in Western Queensland. There were 5,800 people yesterday who did the Nutbush in memory of Tina Turner. That's 58. I think there's something like 7,000 people who are currently in Birdsville. And that's a massive input of economic development and money into that community that comes from having people in the big smoke with the money come and visit these little country towns and support initiatives in those areas. So really, it's a strength of partnership. We don't know everything, but within our team, we know a lot. And with that information, we can then deliver really great results for people. It's also about shared beliefs. And this is really important. And Peter's got 10 magnificent shared beliefs at Bank of Ideas. And these are some that I've condensed and we really, truly believe in. And this really was the backbone of our support and the initiatives that we created when we were supporting farmers and rural communities. Strong, resilient communities are built from the inside out, not from the outsiders coming in. Mm-hmm. We in the big smoke might know something, but people who live in these country towns, they know what makes the place tick. They know the people, they know the families, they know the resources, they know what's the fabric of their community. So coming from the outside in, really, we haven't earned the respect of that community and we don't really know. Relationships are built on mutual respect. Today, I'm working with Peter on this project. We've been working together for 3 years and we've been talking about this venture, and we both trust each other. We have a belief in each other that together we can make a difference in Australia. And I know that with Deb, your input from the United States, and I know we've got 1 or 2 other people from around the world, particularly Europe, who are interested in participating with Rebuilding Australia, that collectively we can bring that information and help. Creating change starts with a conversation. My wife said this to me the other day. She said, "So when are we going to have a conversation?" I said, "Okay, it's all right. We'll get to that conversation." But change starts with a conversation. We're going to move house. Okay, where are we going to move to? In communities, how do we change what's been happening in our communities to give them a new vitality, a new life? How can we progress what we see today in our community maybe as something that's not great? How can we move that forward? How can we also look at what's actually possible? And within inside our communities, there are people who have the answers to our problems and our challenges. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. We also need to have a positive mindset. I think without a positive mindset, we're not going anywhere. We need to believe that there is a future. And this is, I think, and one of the great things about dealing with people in country towns is that they have lived there the majority of their lives in most cases. They've lived through tough times. They've learned to become very resilient people. And I think with an open eyes process and a positive attitude, those people continue to live there and they want to give back to their community. And that's one of the things that we also have as a shared belief. Successful communities are rich in diversity, cultures, people and skills. There isn't a part of Australia that isn't, as a country, doesn't have a Chinese takeaway shop in a country town. There isn't a country town that doesn't have an Indigenous people. There are Indians, there are Greeks, there are Italians, there are every nationality in Australia represented in every one of these rural communities. So there's a wide diversity of both ethnic cultures, languages, beliefs. How can we bring those people together and really help them empower that community? And then I suppose if it's to me, it's got to be up to me, because the world is a big place and I can't be waiting for someone to come in on the white horse and save my town or save my family or save my business. So really, at the end of the day, it's up to these communities to actually want to own the change, own the future, and then we can start to work together. So across the rural Australia, there are hundreds of towns that are affected. And I know Peter drove I think it was November last year, Peter, from Canberra back to Western Australia. And I know you commented on the numbers of country towns where there were empty shops, very few people in towns, whether that's a post-COVID or whether it's just a natural decline in population. We've also got the challenge of natural disasters. We've got aging populations. You know, people are leaving these country towns because they don't have health services. And I know Peter's just recently had a fantastic example of how an organisation is actually keeping the elderly people in the country town. And then we get reductions in government services. And whether we like it or not, if a town loses a teacher from a school or a town loses a health service that's funded by a state government or a local council, that does affect the viability of those country towns, and people will move because they need those basic services. So at Rebuilding Australia, our plan is that we want to help these country towns rebuild and refocus their efforts and become the towns they want to be. And so there's a process called ABCD, and I thought this was just spelling early on, but Peter educated me. Thank you, Peter. Asset-based community development. And really, it's a fantastic way of understanding and acknowledging that with actually inside the community of every country town, there are people who have the knowledge, the skills, and the assets to be able to help build that country town or build a community. It doesn't have to be a country town, build a community anywhere into what it can possibly be. It's amazing unless you actually ask someone a specific question. Do you know of someone, or do you know a plumber, or do you know? Invariably somewhere in our chains of connections, we know someone who can solve that problem. And so really the ABCD process, which Peter's going to talk a little bit about in a minute, is really about having a look at what assets are in the community. How can we put them all together? How can we, with the community's input, develop a plan for the future? So what are assets? Well, assets are both financial, but they're also physical. They're also human assets, human capital. And so these are some of the assets that communities have. Now, I know that I was looking at one of the community's websites today and talks a lot about government and council, but it doesn't talk a great deal about diversity of culture. And it's interesting that the assets of a community are the people of the community. They are the infrastructure of the community. So people, skills and talents, what do they, what skills do people have? What talents do they possess? Peter, you want to throw in, some suggestions here about what assets might be in a community?
Yeah, I mean, obviously institutional assets like the local government is one, the school, the local police office, whatever. But you did right. It's the most important asset is the people asset, and it's the skills, the experiences, the knowledge, the connections. We often talk about, people have gifts of the head. Everyone knows something about something. We have gifts of the hands. Everyone has some practical skill, whether it be to cook a cake, plant a tree, coach a soccer team, put a social media strategy together. These are gifts of the hands. People have gifts of the feet, connections, and above all, people, I think the most important gift is the gift of the heart. Everyone cares about something, and I think the starting point often in these communities is to discover what people care about and who else cares about that, and how do we get people together. And so that to me is vital. But you did right, cultural gifts are there, cultural assets, the stories of the town. Every one of these small towns has amazing stories, and each of those stories is an asset that can actually be built upon. And you look at some small towns who've just totally reinvented themselves through an asset. Look at that little town of Holbrook and the submarine, and why they have it as the entrance, and what they've done to reposition themselves once the National Highway bypassed them. It all came back to a story of a submariner by the name of Holbrook, who gave the town its name, and why he gave the town the name. Again, all these assets are there. Yep,
great point. So Peter, I want to ask you to actually tell us a little bit about this town of Coolin in Western Australia. Now, I know you know all about this town, so if you could share with us where Coolin came from, and I mean, this was Coolin's initial mission statement. I'll let you take up the the presentation.
Yeah, well, to me, I'm a bit biased, but I tend to think Coolin is probably the best example I know in Australia of small town reinvention. This was a community back in the late 80s who had just lost its bank. The post office was closing down. It was losing services, down to 283 people. And one night, a group of them came together 28 years ago. I had the privilege of being there to facilitate that night and to see the change in people's attitude. Basically, they decided we need to draw a line in the sand. We need to kind of like stop our depopulation and the loss of services. And the way we're going to do it is through two things. We're going to become more than a dot on the map. We're going to be a place that people want to come to. And secondly, we're going to build a sense of pride in this community where people will be proud to have their kids go to the local school, will be proud to want to retire here rather than move to the coast or to the big city. And that night, about 68 people came together and came up with that statement, and around that statement put together a set of kind of like actions which over the last 28 years has continued. The result is today that the population is 3 times what it was back then, whereas most towns around them have halved their population in that 28 years. And you've got to say this is the best example of small town reinvention. One of the first things they do to be more than a dot on the map was to say, why don't we create a signature event? And each year they put on this thing called the Coolin Bush Races. A local farmer gave them a peppercorn lease, $1 for the next 99 years, a piece of land that runs alongside the lake, about 10 k's out of town, and each year people come. They have a maximum of only allowed 4,000 people by the health department to be there. Last year, tickets for this sold out in 51 seconds when they went online. It is an amazing example. It's one of the best weekend experiences. I've got all of my family going, grandkids and my 2 daughters this year. It'll just be one of the most amazing weekends of their life. But that brings people in. As part of that, they decided to start looking at what do they do to kind of like become more than the dot. They discovered that there was a grant available to store water as part of a water storage kind of like program. They built underwater tanks, captured all the winter rains, pump it back during the summer, and all year you drive into this town and it has one of the most sensational wow factor kind of like images of any town. A group of local farmers started building these crazy tin horses out to the racetrack. And suddenly someone said, wow, we got about 30 or 40 and people are stopping and photographing all these things. Imagine if we had 200 of them. And so they started to run workshops, and now they have developed these amazing art collection. They then decided, why don't we decide to recall the highway through our town, the Tin Horse Highway? And someone stupidly said, well, let's ask the Main Roads Department, to which everyone said, no way, much bigger to beg forgiveness than ask permission. They just went and did it. And one of the great bits of that story was they invited the Premier of the day, whose name was Gallop, to come and open the Tin Horse Highway, which he very proudly did, flew in and flew out to open it. Today, it's probably one of the most popular tourist routes in WA. It's a town that realised that the most important attraction out there in the wheat belt was Wave Rock in a town called Coolin. Called Hyden, about 60 k's away. And although the main road out of the city of Perth doesn't go through Coolin, they had an alternative way there, but it did involve sealing about 53 kilometres of gravel, which they and their small council took on to do over a 10-year period. And today that road is sealed and caravans go right through all the time. It's just become such a popular destination. They opened a free caravan park. They've invited travellers to become an official ambassador, and their community development officer went off and did a course on how to put up a 6x4 poster on the side of a caravan without wrinkles. So they invite people to become an ambassador. And we've currently got about 400 caravans wandering around Australia promoting Coolin. They invited this woman who had a vision to run a camps program for vulnerable kids who was experiencing trauma, kids who were in foster care. And so they created a Camp Coolin out there, and 1,000 kids a year went out there to kind of like have a 1 or 2 week experience in Coolin. You can imagine the flow-on impact this has had on the economy. And you drive now into that town, it's a vibrant community, and the community just keep doing things. The final 2 things I might say about Coolin is they stupidly asked their young people, what do you think would make a difference out here? And they said a water slide. Well, if you ask kids for their opinion, you've got to respect the answer and think about it. And so 6 farmers checked out and they found a second-hand water slide for sale. Just happened to be 6,000 kilometres away on the Sunshine Coast on the other side of the country. But they raised the $25,000 it was being sold for, and in 6 trucks drove over there, dismantled it, brought it back and assembled it. And today, it's the biggest water slide outside the capital city of WA. And it is where you can imagine almost every farming family in the wheat belt hang out during the hot summer months. It's an amazing kind of like attraction, just another thing this town has done. It also happened to be the first town to start a community bank in Western Australia. We now have 50 kind of like community banks in WA. The first was in this little town of 283 people. And the final thing they're currently doing is they realised they needed to retain their pub. It looked like it was going to fall over and fall into outside hands. And recently they have raised the money not just to buy the building, but to buy the licence. And they have now reopened that as not the Coolin Pub, but the Coolin Hub, and turned it into this incredible family-friendly hotel, pub, and community facility in the town. I could go on. I've probably shared 20% of all the initiatives they've done, but that's why I consider Coolin to be the best example I know of a small town that's reinvented itself. At the heart of it is what we've all been talking about all the time. This is an inside job. This is about the community driving it. And I love to reword asset-based community development as asset-based citizen-driven development. This is all about community driving from within, and Coolin is just a great example of it. The reason why I suspect that well over 80% of our small towns are dying in Australia is that they're all sitting there waiting for either the cavalry to turn up, or in Western Australia waiting for Lottery West to send them a grant to do something. Why Coolin's different, and I can quote other towns. Just this morning, I had a Zoom with the town of Noangarup, who are just doing, again, amazing things to reinvent their town. We've got wonderful, wonderful examples right across Australia. The one thing they all have in common is it is passionate locals who are actually driving this, a belief that within we have the assets to do this, and above all, have the will to try to create a future for them, for their families and future generations. And it seems to me it's that mindset and that local leadership using those local assets and engaging the broader community seems to be the recipe that's actually needed. And Coolin is just a great example of it.
Thank you, Peter. Wonderful. That's truly amazing. Now, Peter, I recently saw the town of Bulls, and I'd love you to share a little bit about this town and how it came to be, and how they've really taken on the tag of their town name to really just create an international presence for their town for us.
Yeah. Bulls actually is not in Australia. It's actually in New Zealand. It's in the North Island. It's probably an hour and a half north of Wellington on the road to Auckland. In fact, it's at the crossroads of 3 national highways. But probably 30 years ago, it was one of those towns that you accelerated through rather than slow down and stop. It was just full of empty shops. And I suppose one day a group of locals said, you know what, we do need to kind of like become a reason why people want to stop. And Again, as happened in the case of Coolin, as happening in the case of Nowangarup now, it all starts with conversation. It all starts with the community coming together and people starting to share. And someone said, you know what, the greatest asset we've got is our name, Bulls. You know, we should kind of like promote that. We should make that our slogan, you know, and someone said, well, what do you mean? And, you know, he started talking about, well, we should promote ourselves the only town in New Zealand where you can get milk from bulls. And he came out with a whole pile of these silly one-liners. But someone said, you know what, Bill was right. This is kind of like where we need to go. And so what they've simply done is they have become the Bull Town, and they've invited every business and every organisation in the town to adopt a bull name, which you've got to register and you've got to pay, I think, $300 to and whatever. So, you know, one restaurant's is called Full as a Bull, the other's called Delectable. You know, I love, you know, the toilet block is called Relievable. You know, you see up there a picture of the driver of all of this program. The bank actually got held up one night. So a group of guys came to the forklift and ran off with the ATM. Well, what I loved about the committee, that was within hours of the sun coming up and the discovery of the robbery, they had a banner across the front of the bank saying "Robbable," and that was on the front page of the National. That captured the front page of the national newspaper. You can't buy publicity like that. Today, that town is a vibrant community. Very hard to find a car space in it, whereas, as I said, 30 years ago, it was as dead as a dodo. It's just a great example of a town that's actually taken something as simple as a name and turned that into an amazing asset. And through it, have had a huge amount of fun. And today, it's one of the most popular kind of like tourist destination small towns of New Zealand. People who've had a ball doing it, but a very community-driven type of initiative.
Wonderful. So, guys, those two examples just prove to you that there are communities out there who, empowered, can actually come up with a plan for their future. They can be dynamic, they can be thoughtful, they can be progressive, and it's great that those people are out there and they're hungry for it. So part of what Rebuilding Australia does with Peter here in Australia is that we run what we call community development planning workshops, and these really are a speciality of process. But Peter, tell us just a little bit about how we run through this with your experience. You've done them so many times. Just give us a little bit of the nuts and bolts about how we go about engaging with the communities, finding out what they really want, mapping it out, etc.
Yeah, I suppose, you know, what these workshops, and let me say it's more than workshops, it's a whole pile of ways that we simply just get people together into what I call learning conversations about issues that really matter, whether that's through bringing together young people into a conversation, whether it's about having a community opportunities workshop where the whole town might come together, and using a whole pile of gaming and fun kind of like methodologies, really getting people to really focus on three things. Firstly, what is it in terms of the future that we love, that we're currently doing, and we've got to make sure we keep. The future isn't all about creating the new. It's often about building upon what currently works and getting more of it. And so getting people to identify what they love about their town and what is it that works in that town and what is it we really need more of is just such an important starting point. Really important always to start in a community, getting people to talk up, not talk down, getting people to focus on the half full, not the half empty bit of the glass. The second question then is, what is it we need to change to get a better impact, whether that be attitude, whether that be behaviour, whether that be programs, service, how we actually do things in this town, how we organise to do things. What is it that we believe we may need to adapt or modify or change? And the third question is, what is it we don't have that we need to kind of like work on? I need to say that the whole process I've used in this all started in that town of Coolin 28 years ago, and we've just refined it more and more. And there's a whole pile of tools and big idea cards and things where we basically invite people to share their opinion, their ideas, but more important, always include what are you going to do to help make that happen. I've moved beyond this thing of most local governments go out and ask people what's the matter. Well, they'll end up with a whole pile of negative things, and it's all about, yes, this is what you local government need to be doing. More important than asking people what's the matter, more important to ask people what matters to you. Almost the same words, but it always elicits a different response. And so even when we use big idea cards, my big idea for the town is, and then halfway down, and I could help to make this happen by, always engaging people. Particularly when you ask young people, I've done a lot of work with 6, 7 and 8-year-olds, and boy, they're full of ideas, but you know what? They're full of passion. They actually want to be a player. They don't just want to give their ideas. They want to do something about it. And so it's really important that you link conversation and idea generation with action. And with all of that stuff, one of the simplest things then is to help the town to evolve its own action plan in terms of what is it we're actually going to do? What are those critical things and who's going to do it? What resources we've got? Who could help the partner with us? What are the first what are the 5 first steps that we need to take to make all this happen? And so certainly that's been a process we've used right across the country in different places, and it certainly works very well.
It's really important, Peter, to actually make sure that we engage all of the community, the young, the elderly. I mean, with this issue around Australia and now the elderly living at home longer, how do we engage them? How do we support them? But again, all the different nationalities, all of those people and groups of people bring to these communities. They've all got different ideas. They've all got different ways of contributing. And like Coolin, they would never have had the pool if it hadn't been for the young kids piping up and saying we'd love a pool.
Yeah, I need to be quite honest. I believe that one of the most critical reasons why so many of our towns are dying has been the model of community development that we've practiced in this country for the last 30-odd years. And it's been a model where we do things to people and for people. We've got to learn the art of doing things with people, but above all, we've got to learn the art of opening the space of often by the people. So, vast bulk of local governments are into servicing community. No, it's about strengthening community. And the leading way to strengthen a community is build engagement, get people as active citizens in the town. I tend to think that most of our country towns are now like an Australian rules football game where 30,000 people who need the exercise turn up to watch 36 players who don't. And it seems to me that model of community development has been destructive in Australia. And I'm one of those people that's trying to reverse that. And the way to do it is create genuine engagement. And the way to start that always is to use the oldest tool in the toolbox for building community, and it's called conversation. Host conversations. The number one role of community builders is hosting conversation, getting people together around issues and questions that matter, and getting people sharing their opinions and their ideas, and beginning to collectively decide, what's the best way forward.
Yeah, so true. So Deb, I wanted to introduce you here because this is what we're talking about here is what's possible. What can we do in these country towns? What vision do we have? And I'll just give 3 examples here, which are Australian. I'll jump into you in a minute, Deb. But the top left-hand picture there is a picture of, as I alluded to earlier, the Big Red Bash, which is currently this event which is being held in Birdsville in Western Queensland. There's one pub in the town, one building, and one police station. And each year, and I think this year, they were talking about something like 8,500 people making the trek. Now, if you come from Brisbane like I do and you want to drive out to there, it's something like, I think, a 2.5-day drive. We're talking about a third of the distance across Australia and a lot of dirt roads. There in the top right-hand corner there, we've actually got the Elvis Festival, which is a festival that was created in the community of Forbes in Western New South Wales many years ago. And it's now the largest Elvis festival outside of the United States. And literally people come from the United States to Forbes, Parks, isn't it? Parks for the Elvis Festival. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, we've actually got a town called Trundle, which is not far from central New South Wales, where they have a massive ABBA concert and an appreciation event each year, and people come and sing all their ABBA songs. But Deb, the bottom image is actually one from which I pulled from a video in the States. But can you just share with us a little bit about, relating to what Peter has said about Australia and how you're finding small town community development, happening in the United States?
Well, Peter's absolutely right. It starts with not going to a community and saying, here's what we want you to do. It's going to the community and saying, what do you want? And what can we do about it? Let's get started. We are big believers in taking small steps. When you talk about people want the city to do this or the city to do that, they forget that they actually are the city. They already have permission to do 99% of the things they want to do. Filling empty buildings is a great example. I got off a call this morning with some people in Canada about doing an empty buildings tour. And we started that in Webster City, Iowa, where I'm from, and showcased 12 different buildings. The community had lost a major manufacturer, and everybody was in that poor me mood and didn't want to talk about empty buildings. I had a different thought about that. I kind of thought we should showcase them and show them off. And it's beautiful old buildings. Let's talk about the history. Let's talk about what used to be there. And let's hear your ideas of what could be there. And the community just bought right into it, said, yes, we can do that. We're tired of the poor me. Let's think positive. In 18 months, 10 of the 12 buildings on that tour were filled and stay filled today. That was 10 years ago. So bringing that positive attitude and not listening to the committee of negativity is really important. In Akron, Iowa, they had a plant your flag party. So they invited everybody to come with their big idea and plant your flag. What is it that you want to do? And 4 years later, they now have 7 new restaurants in town. They have built a pool that the kids kicked off with a penny drive. All the kids in the school brought pennies and donated it to kick it off. I mean, everybody just gets on board and says, what can we do today? What can we do right now? There was a gentleman that had bought a bank building, an old bank building in Paulding, Ohio, and he really wanted to open up a coffee shop. But he wasn't quite sure if he should do that because, it's not cheap. It's kind of expensive. So we talked through it and I'm like, what can you do today? He goes, well, I can bring a couple of coffee things in and invite the old guys to come have coffee. And that's exactly what they did. And it turned into a community center where the old guys ran the coffee shop and the guy that owns the building can go take care of other business. It's because the community has been involved and people are being heard. The things they want, they're being given the opportunity to try and see if it works. And I'm huge on not worrying about failure because we're all going to fail at something. Failure is just an opportunity to learn what didn't work and to decide, should I try something else or should I go ahead with this again? And then my final favorite story that I love in Hampton, Iowa, which is where I'm born and raised from. When I was chamber director or chamber communications person there, we were trying to figure out what one thing could we enlist everybody to get involved with. And the chamber director had this idea to buy one product local. What could everybody in town purchase and purchase locally? Turns out it was toilet paper. And I'm going to tell you, for a year, everybody bought toilet paper. All the stores jumped in. Yeah, the hardware store had a guy made out of PVC pipe sitting on a toilet. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you the million jokes I know about toilet paper now. But it really increased the revenue in the community and got people to look at, where are we spending our money? What is really important? Do we need to go to the local big box 30 miles away? Or why can't we just stay in town and shop?
Yeah.
Those are just a couple of ideas, but yet get in action and do great things, and they don't have to be big projects. Start with the small steps.
No. Well, I think the coffee shop one is a great idea because literally, he probably didn't have a table, didn't have a coffee machine, but he had a jug and a few coffee beans.
And
now
that's
we've got a
exactly
coffee
how
shop
they
and a bank.
started.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Amazing. And I think one of the great things about being part of what we're trying to build here of people with passion, with ideas, and with experience between yourself, Peter, and myself is that there are literally a plethora of ideas around the world that people in our communities have never heard of. But through this network, we can share them with them. And I was talking recently, Peter will know this place. This is Busselton Jetty in Western Australia, which is one of the longest jetties in the world, I believe, Peter. You correct me if I'm wrong there.
It's certainly the longest in the Southern Hemisphere. Yeah,
it's a massively long. And I was talking with the organisation that actually runs this jetty, and they were looking for some ideas to actually raise some money for the foundation, which supports the maintenance of the Busselton Jetty. And I said to them, well, why don't you just have a long lunch? And they said, what do you mean by a long lunch? And I said, well, could you imagine if the whole of that Busselton Jetty was full of 1.8 metre long white trestle tables, and there were 6 people to a table, and each of the people in the community bought the table? Imagine what the spectacle of that would be. The first year, you might just take it out to the turning point. The second year or third year, you might get all the way to the end. But that's something like 1.8 kilometres long, this jetty. Could you imagine a 1.8 kilometre long long lunch? What a massive opportunity that would be for the community. A great idea, engaging, like Peter likes to create, a positive media story around this. The Busselton community supports the jetty. It could become, and this part of Western Australia is particularly wealthy sort of area, so you could even have large groups of wealthy people buy tables or whatever. Just an idea, but in this Zoom call and within the experiences and knowledge that we have, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands of ideas that we either know of personally or know where we can find them, of people who've done amazing things in their communities. And it might just be that little idea is what sparks off a community to get started. So I suppose as we come towards the end of the hour, and I just wanted to thank you for your time, and I hope that we've given you some idea about what we are aiming to do here in bringing together both Rebuilding Australia, Bank of Ideas, and Save Your Town in the US, and importantly, our corporate partners, who I can't name today because we're in the process of finalising them. But as a committed group, we actually want to see country towns thrive, become positive places to live. Many people have moved during COVID into some of these country towns. They've got great knowledge, they've got great skills, they've got great resources, but as Peter alludes to, unless we actually ask them, we don't know what they've got. So one of the great things that you've got when you work with us, and this tri-partnership here, is that we've actually got the knowledge and skills and the capacity to be able to help a town, a group of country towns, whole communities actually reimagine and rebirth their town for the future. What can it be? There's an energy here to actually make this happen with you. And literally, Peter's helped thousands of towns. I know, Deb, I don't know what the numbers are on yours, but I know when we were running Rural Aid, we had 400 or 500 towns that materially benefited from what our charity did. And those communities all recognise and acknowledge the work that was done to support them. So there's a great opportunity here. If you are working in a country town or you're working in a council, and I know, Neville, you are, and you've got a whole bunch of communities in your area, that if they want to engage us to help them develop this plan for the future in alignment with what your council has done, or Marilyn, in your neck of the woods, there are, Lockington, Rochester, Echuca, all those country towns down there, they're all looking for a way forward. They're looking for positivity. They're looking for excitement. They're looking for an angle to build their future. Then we would love the opportunity to work with you and help you through this process and actually take you to that success point where your town could become a poster town like Coolin or like many others. So after this presentation, we're going to follow up with each and every one of you that's been here today on this call, and the number of those who will get a copy of this presentation afterwards. we actually want to supply you with some tools to actually get your community started on this process. Now, we're a professional organisation. We charge for our services, but we also know that what we deliver, you can actually put a dollar figure to measuring the outcomes for the economy, for the people, and for the vitality of the community. And as part of my experience in running a charity and raising a lot of money is that we've actually put together effectively a pitch document that you can utilize in your community to help you raise the seed capital if required, to go and apply for grants or apply to corporate partners to help you raise the money to get the process started. Now, we know we can do it from scratch, and we can do it with chicken feed amounts of money. But if we can actually get the community engaged, and we can actually cover the cost of developing the CDP and actually engage corporates in the bigger picture about what it is your country, town, and community wants to do, then that means that we can actually achieve far greater outcomes far more quickly, and we can really give it a significant boost. And so what we want to do after this call is we want to invite you to each register to be part of the process, but we then want to have, I will have a one-on-one call with each of the participants and actually talk through what you've actually done, what some of your aspirations are, who your community leaders are, and how we can take them to the next step of actually engaging in this CDP process. So it's really, this is a pitch, but we're saying to you, we've actually got the experience and the knowledge. And if you actually want your communities to be the best they can possibly be empowered, be inspired, be agitated for change, then we know we can deliver for you. So I'm going to finish at that point. I know, Neville, you're on silent, and I know, Marilyn, you've been listening, but your mic has been unmuted. So thank you, all of those of you who've been unmuted, for being quiet while the presentation's gone on. I'll actually stop the recording so that any questions you may ask will actually not be part of the recording for other